Hello, and thank you for joining us for Door County Coastal Terrestrial Invasive Species Education Workshops. This is made possible through funding from the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program and NOAA. In this video, we will finish up the plant ID section, where we'll be focusing on plants that will be flowering and pronounced and noticeable in late summer into early fall. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 6 different species: European marsh thistle, Burnet saxifrage, sweet clover, spurge, and we'll highlight 2 different non-native grasses, reed canary grass and Japanese stilt grass. We'll start off with European marsh thistle. So this was introduced sometime in the 1900s, and it was actually widely considered an accidental introduction, most likely arriving as a contaminant in seed crop, forage, or ballast, similarly to other Eurasian thistles. This thrives in moist and seasonally flooded sites and really does best in partial to full sun areas. So European marsh thistle spends most of its life as a basal rosette, as seen here in this picture, very similar to how garlic mustard grows. So it'll grow as these leaves just on the ground, usually forming a dense carpet of leaves where a population is really exploded, and then it will send up a flowering stalk. So these leaves can be up to a foot long, and they're very narrow, lance-shaped, and the lobes are very deep, almost all the way to that midrib, and they have very spiny margins on them. The stems and leaves are both very hairy and spiny with wings. My rule of thumb is, if it looks like it wants to maim you, chances are it's probably not a native thistle. We do have some native thistles, but they typically will not have these spiny leaves or stems to them. And European marsh thistle can grow anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall. The flowers of European marsh thistle are a purple color, and they're tightly clustered at the top of these stems. You might see them coming down a little bit, but prominently will be in that very top portion of the stems. So there are some other thistles that may be confused with European marsh thistle. We have 2 here that we're going to talk about. We have swamp thistle and Canada thistle. Both of these will grow in very similar habitats, but there are a few characteristics that will differentiate them. Swamp thistle is native to our region, but it is less spiny overall, and the flowers are usually solitary or in pairs, not in those tight clusters that European marsh thistle will have. And the individual flower heads are also smaller, up to about 1.5 inches. Canada thistle is a versatile plant, but it easily can be found in similar habitats, but it's often much shorter, usually only growing up to about waist height, so 3 to 4 feet tall. Similar flowers, but the flower heads are numerous and in loose spreading clusters. European marsh thistle, the flowers will be very tightly compacted on there. Burnet saxifrage, also native to Eurasia, and for this one the time of introduction is really unclear. There's no definite answer to when it was introduced. It was likely accidental, but given its similar look to Queen Anne's lace, it may have been here for quite some time, just sort of flown under the radar. It is often spread via human actions, so any sort of land disturbance, mowing, construction, anything like that will cause the seeds to be spread. And this one prefers dry, well-drained, calcareous soils. So here in Door County, you're going to really find this prominently in the northern portion where we do have those soil types like that. So Burnet saxifrage has compound leaves that are up to about 12 inches long, but they're also rather narrow, so they probably about 2 to 3 inches wide. The leaflets are oval shaped with very small teeth along the edges, and they become smaller and more deeply lobed as they ascend up the stem towards the top. So this upper picture is actually the basal leaves or the bottom of the plant growing along the ground, and then this other leaf here is closer to the top of the plant. And you can see how markedly different they look from one another. So like Queen Anne's lace, Burnet saxifrage will have small white flowers in clustered compound flat tops. They do not have any bracts, or they're very reduced. So the bracts, if you see this picture on the left here of the seeds, the bracts would appear underneath that, sort of like leafy appendages, almost like a modified leaf there. But this one will not have those, or be very greatly reduced. And the fruits of this are going to mature to be dry and smooth. So unlike Queen Anne's lace, which would have fruits that have spurs on them where they stick to you, these ones will not have that. So Queen Anne's lace is going to be the most common one, if that was not apparent by now. The leaves of Queen Anne's lace are much more finely divided. They're going to be very fern-like, very feathery and delicate. The leaves and the stems of Queen Anne's lace are also going to be very sparsely hairy, where Burnet saxifrage will be primarily smooth. And then the flowers, you can see here, have those bracts. So this middle picture there, those leafy appendages right underneath the flower are the bracts of there. So these ones are very pronounced. Burnet saxifrage will not have those, or they'll be very small. And then the fruits, as they mature, they start to fold up for Queen Anne's lace, and you can see in this right picture, they have these little bristle edges here that will stick to you, animals, or anything to spread themselves around. And Burnet saxifrage will not have those bristly fruits. Sweet clover. This one is native to the Mediterranean region, so a little bit different. And it's a little bit interesting because it's been here a long time, but is still not regulated as an invasive species here in Wisconsin. And it was first documented back in the mid-1600s and was intentionally introduced for agriculture, so forage, nitrogen fixing, and green manure crop covers. And this one thrives in disturbed sunny sites, so you'll often see it along roadsides, in old fields, and sometimes even in pastures. So in Wisconsin, we do have two species of sweet clover that are differentiated by the flowers. So we're going to broadly talk about them both. So the sweet clover will have alternating compound leaves in groups of 3. So very similar to how poison ivy will have its 3 leaves, this one will have the same overall structure. The individual leaves of them, the leaflets, are about 1 inch long, oval in shape, and then they do have very neat teeth around the edges. For sweet clover, the stems are strongly ascending, so they are a very robust plant, almost a bush-like appearance to them. The flowers are very small, and they'll be either white or yellow. That's how you would differentiate between the two species. But really, for sweet clover, as long as you can identify that it is sweet clover, for a management perspective, the exact species is not really necessary. And sweet clover is quite fragrant, so if you do brush it, you'll get that sort of sweet hay-like smell to it. There are a few plants in our region that do look superficially similar to sweet clover. When I say that, we're just going to focus on the leaves. So both our round-headed bush clover and our tick trefoils will have those same groups of 3 leaves, so compound leaves in sets of 3. The flowers will look very different for both of these species. So for the brown-headed bush clover, the leaves and stem are going to be very hairy, and then the flowers are more of an oval-shaped cluster tucked away in those leaf axils. And you can see here they're a bit of a cream or white colored, and then they'll mature into brown balls basically as they age throughout the summer. Then the showy tick trefoil, which I'm highlighting here, we do have multiple species in Wisconsin, but this is our most common one. Also has compound leaves in groups of 3, and the leaflets are hairy and do not have any teeth along the edges, which is going to differentiate it from the sweet clover, which will have teeth on the edges. And then the flowers are a pinkish purple in color, which is going to be very different from our sweet clovers. Spurge is native to Europe and was introduced sometime in the 1800s as an ornamental plant. Since they've escaped and spread via contaminated hay, seed, and farm equipment, they've really become a problem throughout the Wisconsin area. And we do have 2 different species here, and we'll highlight both of them, but both of them will have milky sap if you break the stem, and both have that same yellow color to them. So for both spurges, they're going to have very long, narrow leaves, so they're going to be longer than they are wide, and they can have a bluish or waxy color to them, and like I mentioned earlier, they will have a milky sap if you break the stems, and they are very known to produce large patches via underground rhizomes. And for both species, the flowers are going to be a yellowish green color and are quite tiny, but they do produce a mass of them, so it's going to be very pronounced. So here we're going to talk about both the species of spurge. So leafy spurge is on the left-hand side, is a taller, more robust plant. The leaves can range anywhere from 3.2 to 10 millimeters wide, so very narrow. Flowers are similarly that size, 8 to 16 millimeters wide, and they will rise above the plant, so you can see them even later in the season. And plants for leafy spurge are usually about a foot or taller. Cypress spurge, however, on the right-hand side of the screen, is going to be overall smaller. The leaves are less than 2.5 millimeters wide, so very, very narrow. And the flowers are also very small, 3 to 6 millimeters wide. And here's the thing we talked about before. Later in the season, the new side shoots grow up and hide the flowers, so these flowers are tucked down below the vegetation. And these plants are usually less than a foot tall. So if you see a small, neat mound less than a foot tall and flowers seem to disappear under leaves as it matures, that's going to be your cypress spurge. And if you see taller, bushier plant with more substantial leaves and flowers that stay visible, that's going to be your leafy spurge. But as with the sweet clovers, the true identification is not really as critical when it comes down to a management perspective. There are a couple of lookalikes. So these 2 lookalikes, while the flowers are very different, they're going to have very similar leaf structures. They're going to be very narrow, slender leaves. So on the left, we have butter and eggs. It's sometimes confused with our cypress because it does have yellow flowers, but for butter and eggs, it has no milky sap. And these ones are a little bit more of a pale yellow versus the cypress, the spurges, which will have like a lime green color. And they're going to be much more showy than the spurges. Rolled milkweed is a native milkweed to our region. Also has very narrow leaves and will have a milky sap like spurge. But how you can tell this apart from your spurges is the stem will have fine hairy lines running down it, whereas spurge will be hairless. And if you find this flowering, milkweed will have a cluster of white flowers, which is very different from our spurges. So now we're going to talk about our 2 grasses for the day. So our first one is going to be reed canary grass. This one is going to be much more visible in late summer into early fall because of those seed heads. So reed canary grass does have a very complicated status. Because there actually are native varieties in part of North America, and Eurasian cultivars were brought in much later. The native forms existed pre-colonial, but the invasive Eurasian strains were first cultivated in New England by the 1830s, and with widespread planting reported by the 1930s throughout North America. And cultivation goes back as far as 1479 in Sweden, and this one really thrives in wet areas. It was intentionally planted for forage, hay, erosion control, and even sometimes as an ornamental. So there are a few characteristics that really set Ree canary grass apart from other grasses, which will be key for identifying it. So the leaves do have a bluish green color to them, and they're very rough in texture. And where the leaf meets the stem is really where the identification when it's vegetative is going to really help. So Ree canary grass does have a very pronounced collar, as seen in this right-hand picture. It also has a ligule. So a ligule is just a little membrane at the base of the leaf blade. So if you were to pull back a leaf blade, you would see this paperiness there that's very pronounced. A lot of grasses either do not have that, or it will be in a different sort of texture. So you can see in this right-hand picture as well, that ligule. So the flowers, or the fruiting structure of Ree canary grass, are panicles. So they open up when they're blooming, as seen in the right-hand picture, and then as they mature and successfully pollinated, they will start to close up and turn a straw brown color, as seen in the left-hand picture. So there are a couple of other grasses that can look very similar and that are quite common throughout Wisconsin. I have all three here. So Ree canary grass, the middle one is orchard grass, which is also a non-native one, and then we do have our blue joint grass, which is a native species. So the Ree canary grass has that pyramidal flower heads that contract when they mature. The ligules are going to be very thin and transparent, but very pronounced. Orchard grass has little florets that are on stiff, wiry branches. In one way I was taught, that lower branch sort of looks like a thumb. So if you hold your hand out with your thumb aside, pointed out, it's how I've always sort of remembered it. The ligule, while it's also very pronounced, you can see in that middle right picture, it often has a shredded look to the tip of it, whereas Ree canary grass will not have that shreddiness to it. Blue joint grass will grow in a very similar habitat to Ree canary grass. It also has that pyramidal flower head shape. It tends to nod to one side when it's mature, whereas Ree canary grass will tend to be just very erect and straight up. And the ligule for blue joint grass is often very ragged edge, not a smooth entire ligule. Japanese stiltgrass is an up-and-coming species for Wisconsin. It has been found in a few spots in southern Wisconsin and is listed as prohibited within the state. So if you were to find it, we would want to work on controlling this as quickly as possible because it can become very problematic in our forested areas. So Japanese stiltgrass was native to Asia and arrived in North America in the early 1900s, accidentally as packing material in imported goods from Asia, something like porcelain or ceramics. It loves shaded, wet areas, so like forest understories, floodplains, and wet ditches. And it really becomes a concern because it thrives in these shaded areas where you might think other non-native invasives wouldn't be a problem, and it can easily form dense mats that smother out native understory. So Japanese stiltgrass has a very characteristic leaf to it, which helps with the identification. The leaves are alternate and up to about 4 inches long and tapered at both ends, almost like a football, a very long football. But the leaves have a very distinctive white strip running down the midvein. And the stems really form a dense, tangled mat close to the ground, so they sort of ramble about on the ground and not very erect like some of our other grasses will be. The flower stalks are very inconspicuous. 1 to 3 stalks can be on there. It is an annual, so it will produce its seeds and grow all within 1 year, but this is also a benefit because the roots are very weak and is able to be pulled out of the ground easily, so new populations can, as long as they're small, can easily be maintained or controlled just by manual removal. And there are a couple of other species that will look superficially similar, especially when you see them vegetatively. So we do have rice cut grass here on the left. This will grow in a very similar habitat. It does tend to like more sun, but it can handle some pretty deep areas of shade. And it does have a very similar low tangled growth form. But how you can tell this one apart, rice cut grass has hairy nodes on the stem. So you can see in that far left picture there, the node is that labeled in there, and it just has a very pronounced ring around there. The leaf midvein is not white. I don't have a picture of that, but the leaf will not have that very pronounced midvein. And rice cut grass will have larger inflorescences, meaning just the flower heads will be far more obvious. Lawn-awned woodgrass, which is seen on the right, has this very similar overall growth form. Alternate leaves, very long and gated, also will grow in our woodlands, but the leaves do not have that white midvein, and the nodes are densely hairy as well, and again has a very long, pronounced inflorescence. And then these ones will have nodding texture to them as well. And thank you for watching.